So there are differences. And in US, I think that our chairman, Jørgen Hamrén, he said that they have freedoms first. So where we have in Europe maybe dignity first, they have freedoms first. And I mean, it's just words, but it means a lot when you have the practical consequences of it. In China, they have another way of looking upon personhood, yin-yang, different kinds of things as part of things. They have another way of viewing genes compared to other kinds of things. They think informed consent is not equally important as we would say in Europe. So there are lots of things that are different and that we have to talk about how to bridge that gap. Africa, they have family consent and they have lots of other ways of thinking. Some of you may know much more about this than I do. But nevertheless, even if there are these differences, we have succeeded in making some kind of global bioethics, global biolaw. For a long time, we had the human rights. We've had UNESCO's Declaration on Bioethics since 2005. And we have professional codes of conduct in a number of crucial areas. In the future, we may have nano, some kind of codes of conduct, synthetic biology, ICT, the whole internet feature. How will that be established? And climate change. In fact, I'm chairman of the Danish National Commission and vice president of the IGBC, and climate change has been on the agenda in UNESCO because there was some wish to make a kind of convention on climate change. It's being debated now as part of a longer procedure, and I'm not sure whether it will be the case or not. My government tells me to be skeptic, and I'm representing my government when I'm down there. But I think that it might, in fact, be a good idea because you might have some kind of overall principles that you have as kind of leading principles that you can try to achieve. So I'm not that skeptic, but it depends a lot about how you're doing. But I mean, from the UNESCO Declaration on Bioethics, we know that you can adapt it differently according to different kinds of culture. So you might have it, but it's very crucial how it is worded and how it's being used. We know from the UNESCO Declaration that we have these different ethics. I'll not go into them. So it can be done. We know from the nano law, where Ines and I were part of making an opinion on nano law. And there, why I wanted to show you this is both because we said to which extent should nano law be national, European, or global, and it's this realistic. We try to take in the global part, and we try to persuade the EU to take the initiative in global fora to do something about it. And a code of conduct would be an important part of meeting these challenges. And just to show you that these are the kinds of principles that they're working with in that code of conduct that we recommended, that they now made. And I mean, it's meaning, sustainability, precaution, inclusiveness, excellence, innovation, accountability. And of course, you can put different things into that. And you may say, well, does it work? But it's like the human rights, the other things. You may have to start off having these broad principles and then put things into them as time goes by. The same goes with synthetic biology. We also here said that EU should take it up in global fora. We say something about patenting, I'll come back to that. We say something about trade and global justice, that it should be addressed in, for instance, WTO. And we say that there should be EU biosafety standards when import and export to try to make sure that the range of having these things would be as broad as possible. What about biolaw? This was the bioethical part. Now we're coming to the biolaw, the governance part. And we should also always remember that biolaw is reflecting bioethics. As you talked about the other days, we are standing on top of giants. We're not here standing on top of giants, but we need to reflect that we cannot make biolaw without having bioethics. On the other hand, it's not a blueprint of things if there is nothing. And we need to have, if we want to have it really, to have consequences and be of real importance, we need in some areas not only to have bioethics, but also to have more kind of governance, more hard law, bylaw. Many new national regulations, and the wish about making it is to protect the weak, for instance, the Helsinki Declarations, the persons, and the values, the principles we talked about just before. I'm trying very often, being around in international fora, to present law as a friend, not an enemy. What do you think? If you just think a bit, would you think of law as a friend, not an enemy? Huh? Normally people don't. They think upon it as an enemy. But I mean, that's in a way wrong, because it's meant to secure clarity, both for the ones who are doing things or not doing things. It is meant to make people be responsible. It's meant to make incentives for ethical behavior. Why do we see it as an enemy? And I think that very much corresponds to the way of bioethics trying to make prohibitions, to have the no hat on, to say no. So we should make sure that both bioethics and biolaw is seen upon also as a friend, as securing things, securing resources, doing good things. And that's one of the challenges that we face as lawyers, and that I hope you will help me try to find out what to do. Do you see law as a friend?
Me?
Yeah?
I do.
You should say yes.
It gives me a living, so that's the important thing.
Okay. We have different kinds of governance approaches. I mean, you can have a laissez-faire, do nothing. We can have a liberal, voluntary professional guidelines, code of conduct, at least as part of the path, and in some ways it'll be enough, in other ways it won't. We can have the cautious regulatory, making framework legislation that you can fill in. Much of the biolaw, the conventions and bioethics are like that. And we can have prohibitions. And I mean, it looks nice to be laissez-faire, just lying there, looking up into the sky. But this may be the result if we're doing nothing, because things will happen that we do not approve of and would like to make sure will not happen. Well, now we're coming to, that was bioethics and biolaw. Now we're coming to the governance in a broader sense. I'm sometimes wondering, I know the ones of you coming from the university field, haven't you experienced that we've all been exposed to what they call new public management? Does that ring a bell? Because what they're doing there, I was wondering, that's how you fancy that university persons should act when we're talking about university administration, leadership, and we're talking about governments. And could we do the same kind of thinking if we're talking about nations, universities, what have you, when we should try to make them focus on the global scale? Could we use their own kind of tools of remedies? I wonder, we could make some framework, some goals, some benchmarks, some contracts and negotiation, and some performance indicators. That's what they do to us. Couldn't we do the same to them and just take global responsibility? It might be worthwhile thinking a bit about. The newer trend in governance is new public diplomacy, much softer and in that sense more fitting to the global challenges. It's a new trend, it's soft power, it's knowledge sharing, it's changing behavior, political values, ethics, and it's foreign policy moral. I think that tendency is a way of responding to the global challenges, and maybe when we're talking about global bioethics, global governance, global biolaw, we should have that in mind to make the softer ways of thinking, which is the new trend here, to try to introduce that into our way of thinking in the challenges we are facing when trying to green humanity. I've been member of an EU expert group trying to make global governance of science. And I do think that we've tried to make some things here, practices of ethical governance should be promoted. We're trying to say we should not have any ethics-free zones, critical reflections on means and ends on science, harmonized governance of science across national borders, open access, enact basic fundamental rights, maybe start on lowest common denominator, even if that's not the best part, and code of conduct as part of ongoing process. What I do think is, it has been criticized, and I think rightfully so. And I think one of the critics that I liked the most was the UNESCO, who said, well, you're not doing enough about exactly what I'm saying here. That's why I thought about it. The positive thing, how can we help diminish divides? How can we create resources, etc., to take responsibility for the social needs? And I was wondering, by way of how to approach this kind of work. Sometimes I'm chairing a lot of law reform commissions, etc. in Denmark. It's a tiny country, we're not that many. And sometimes I try to say to them, well, instead of making the long factual findings, the long analysis of this and that and everything, I think we should start off saying, what do we want to achieve? Make 10 recommendations. I mean, we can alter them, we can refine them, we can change them totally, no problem. But it's always like that. We know that from the EGE also. We know that from all, I think you know that, from all the things you're in. Normally you spend so much time on little details in the fact-finding and the analysis. And when you come to the recommendation, everybody's tired, the time slot is over, it's usually delivered yesterday or the month before, what have you. And then you have no time to do that properly. So I think it's important, when we're talking about global governance, talking about how to make recommendations, etc., start off in the other end. I mean, you shouldn't be bound by what you're saying, but to have that in mind when doing the other things will help you along. It doesn't matter really if there's a small, minor error in the fact-finding, but it matters if you try to be creative doing recommendations. This was one of the faults we made here, and I'll try not to make it again, but I won't promise. Which are the global governance dilemmas? Well, we are facing the dilemma that many stakeholders and interests will be there, really, really many. And some of them are very forceful. I think that John Sostan talked about the lobbyists, and I do think that both in nations and in the EU and in the WTO and what have you, in all of these cases, we have very strong economic interests and very strong companies and ways of lobbying. So we shall have to stand up to that somehow. And there I think that you're correct in saying that, well, who do we have? Who will they be afraid of? And they will be afraid of the common opinion, the NGOs, the people saying we don't want this. That we've lots of stories about that this may ruin business. So even if they think they don't want it, or it's bad for economy, it's a forceful way of thinking. So that's why I think we should both take top down and bottom up when we're finding out how to green humanity, how to deal with these challenges. There are also many nations and organizations, professional organizations, NGOs, universities, what have you. There are many cultures and religions, individualistic, communitarian, all kinds of stuff. We also heard about that during the later days. There are many topics and persons of great variation. I mean, if you talk with people who are in the business of human resources or in management or what have you, they are working with a lot of different characteristics of people. Some of you been to the tests where you should be tested to be very good at this and that and everything. And we have idealists, individualists, mediators, all kinds of persons. We should try to make sure that we make use of some of them in doing good in these areas. Not only not to fly or empty your waste in the right way or what have you, but to do something more in these areas. We should try to find them, to see all these kinds of stakeholders, plurality in many ways, to see it not only as a problem, but also as a possibility. Well, when coming to the challenges, which are these? And as I said in the introduction, I think it's very important that we use the experiences from human rights. Which parts of the human rights has functioned?